And so we started looking into this, and they said, hey, there's this guy called Tony Tetro, who's this huge art forger in America. He's in jail now, but when he gets out, go look him up. And so I did some investigation, and I kind of found a lead, and I ended up meeting Tony. And it was kind of funny because we met at this kind of swanky place in Newport. And he had all these people around, he was smoking cigars. Everybody knew him. He had a bunch of cronies around him. He was talking about all his Ferraris and stuff. But the reality was that he was broke on his ass, and he was living in a motel. His room was literally next door to a Chinese restaurant, and he walked across the street, because he was really kind of down and out. But somehow we had hit it off. And, within a couple of months, like, he gave me pretty much all of his stuff related to art. He just gave me boxes of stuff. He was like, I like you, I like what you're doing, and, knock yourself out. So that's really how it started. And then over the years, I would hear more and more and more about Tony. He'd kind of open up more and more about everything that happened. And, it ended up that I knew him for like 20 something years. And so I kind of, it was funny because he would start to tell a story, and he just go, Giampiero, you tell it. You know better than I do. I kind of knew everything, knew where all the bodies were buried and all that stuff. So, fast forward to 2017, really, he started doing some work for this, crazy, coked up billionaire guy named James Stunt. He started doing some work for him. And, he started telling me about it. And I was like, well, this is weird. Who's this guy? What's he doing? And Tony said, well, I'm doing like 10 or 12 things for him. He wants to put him in this mansion. He had the biggest mansion in California. It used to be James Stunt. It used to be called Candyland. And Aaron Spelling, the producer, built this house for his wife, Candy. And it was this huge mega mansion. And Stunt married the heiress of the Formula One fortune, Bernie Eccleston. He married the daughter, and so he got all this money. Wow. They bought this house, and now he calls it Stunt Manor, because he was a little bit of a, narcissist. So anyway, he, as far as Tony's concerned, he wants this artwork, Picasso, a Van Dyke, a this, a that, for his house. Well, these guys get to be friends, and, they talk at night. Stunt's up all night, doing drugs and stuff. He's awake, calls Tony in LA, because Stunt at this time is back in London, calls Tony in LA, and they talk about art, cars, women, whatever. And so Stunt says, hey, I want you to come to London. Well, Tony goes to London, and he shows up, and Stunt is kind of on a bender. So he's up all night, and then he sleeps all day. So Tony's just hanging around by himself. And Stunt's nowhere to be seen. So Tony is going to the British Museum with the bodyguards, taking him to the pub and like showing him a good time because he doesn't know what else to do. Anyway, he comes down one day, and he's at the table by himself, and there are these papers there. And he's like, well, what's this? Because he's got nothing better to do. Nobody's there. He's by himself. He starts looking at him, and on these papers, which are some kind of legal contract, some kind of contract that has something to do with a place called Dumfries House, he sees paintings. And the thing with Tony is these paintings are unique individual paintings. They're not copies. So 99% of people think that forgers copy paintings. They don't copy paintings, because if you copied a painting, you'd just be like, it's fake. The real one's at MoMA,
Right.
So it's a work that an artist might have done, maybe in the style of, for a certain time period, using the color palette and subjects of a certain time, right? So it's an individual new painting that you create sort of a backstory. Here's why this exists.
Right.
Here's how this just showed up out of nowhere, like the Lost Leonardo, for example, right? Here's an excuse for why this exists.
Yeah, and isn't it with typical pieces of art like this that there's a historical chain of custody that's written about, and you can corroborate it with other literature that goes back into however long ago.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. So there are a lot of people who can paint perfectly. Okay, you can go get a perfect copy of something. There's a village in China that everybody there works making exact copies of master works. Wow. So you can get that, right? However, what Tony's genius was that he was extremely passionate about the backstory of the art, the details, the minutia. So there's a great example, which I talk about in the book, and in a 17th or let's say 18th century expert book about Rembrandt engravings, there's a footnote, page 78. There's a little footnote and it says, hey, so-and-so said that there was a drawing of this, and so-and-so says that there's not a drawing of this. Nobody's sure. Well, that's really all you need to now go, hey, I'm going to make that maybe drawing exist. I'm going to bring it into being. So, of course, you have to execute it perfectly with all the right materials and all the right technique and the period and everything. Wow. Yeah. So then now you've created a new piece that never existed or maybe existed but is lost, and you have the back history supporting why it exists.
Yeah,
right?
But how does he know that somebody doesn't have that already existing in like a private collection?
I mean, it's a risk you take, but you assume it's been 350 years. If it's going to show up, it would have shown up. So Tony, going back to the loan that he saw, so he could see that these paintings on the contracts, they're mine. They're absolutely mine. These are new paintings that I made. They're my subject. They're mine. Why are they on this document that is going to Dumfries House, some royal Scottish thing? So he goes, this sounds a little fishy to me. He takes out his cell phone and takes 3 pictures, right? When he gets back to LA, he goes, hey, Giampiero, I was just in London and this funny thing happened. Take a look at these pictures. What do you think? And I look at him and I go, very fishy. They're loans to Dumfries House. And Tony had told me it was like Prince Andrew or something like that of the British royal family. But Dumfries House.
So this billionaire guy on a bender was loaning money.
Was loaning artworks.
Loaning artwork.
To Prince Charles into his royal collection. And so I go, well, the f is going on here? And he had mentioned something to Tony. He had said something about like, I'm going to do a loan and I'm going to get all this money, but I'm not going to have to pay it back.
So he explained this whole thing to Tony.
He didn't explain. He just kind of mentioned, he just kind of briefly mentioned like, this thing is going to kind of happen and I could make a bunch of money on it.
Got it.
And Tony's like, well, it doesn't make any sense to me and whatever. So he shows it to me and goes, what do you think? And I go, okay, well, Dumfries House is Prince Charles, the future King of England's headquarters of his charitable foundation. It's in Scotland. He's got all this art in it and everything. And I'm like, okay, well, why is he lending money? That doesn't make it. Or why is he lending art to this thing? And how do you make money off it? Doesn't make sense. And the first thing that I saw was these artworks had crazy values, like $50 million for a Picasso that Tony had made.
And he was claiming these were originals.
Claiming they're original. He's like, I'm lending
even
this
the Prince, Picasso Prince can be worth lots of money, right?
Yeah, Prince can be worth, but not like that. I mean, this
not
is
$50 million.
$50 million is an oil on canvas major piece, right? So it's a major piece that's going to this foundation. He lent it, right? And you go, what's going on? I look at it and I go, well, this is clearly there's something fishy here. They're not just fooling the people at Dumfries House. There's something fishy here because, for example, the Picasso said that it was verified by the Wildenstein Institute. The Wildenstein Institute only exclusively looks at French Impressionists. So they'll look at Renoir and stuff. They would never look at a Picasso. They would never verify a Picasso. They just don't. That's somebody else, right? So I go, there's no expert could have looked at this and accepted a provenance like that, an authentication like that. Then there was a Monet. You know the famous water lilies, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's these famous water lilies. There's a major water lily. It's worth, I forget what it was exactly now in the contract, 30 million, something like that. And it has a date of 18, it's been a while, but let's say 1890. And I'm like, well, could never pass muster either, because that garden where the water lilies are and that Monet built specifically so that he could paint these paintings wasn't built until 10 years later. So you're like, you wouldn't even have to be an expert to go like, this is bullshit. And it's really like a pretty bad, it's a pretty bad mistake. So this told me this did not go to the curatorial staff. Nobody really looked at this. Nobody really went, what are these things? This went to somewhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so these contracts were signed with a guy called Michael Fawcett. Michael Fawcett was Prince Charles' right-hand man, like literally his right-hand man. When Prince Charles broke his arm, he was putting the royal toothpaste.
Name sounds familiar.
Yeah. He's putting the royal toothpaste on the royal toothbrush. I mean, he is as close as you can get. Mm-hmm. And somehow he's in this scheme with Stunt. I can't prove it, right? But he's in the scheme with Stunt. So I look at this and I go, this is a big story, 300 million pounds, $300 million worth of art going into the Prince's collection, the future King of England, the future owner of the royal collection, one of the greatest art collections in the world, is full of fake art. So we thought, well, what if we went to James Stunt's house or his office where he keeps his collection? If it's on the walls, it means it didn't happen. He didn't actually lend them. So no story. Mm-hmm. The hard part is getting in there, right?
Right.
So during this time, he was in a feud with the press in the UK because they were reporting on he was having trouble with money laundering and stuff. He had been charged.
Shocker.
He had been charged with money laundering. And so the press was reporting on him. He hated the press. And so he would go on social media every day, go on YouTube and, have these hour-long kind of coke-fueled rants.
Wow.
Yeah. About...
Is this shit still on YouTube?
No, it's pulled down. In fact, for 2 years, I got up every morning at 5. He got kicked off YouTube. So then he was on Instagram and he was doing lives and stuff. And they would disappear after 24 hours. So every morning for 2 years, I'd get up at 5 in the morning and record his lives. I'd capture him on my phone.
So he would wake up the next day and regret doing it and delete it,
No, they just last 24 hours.
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
I see.
So I'd have to grab them, and now they're all deleted. So I think I'm the only person who has the James Stunt collection in my archives. But anyway, he would go on social media, and one of the crazy things that he was saying was like, I'm going to do a polygraph test. I'm going to have a polygrapher come. I'm going to have it filmed, and I'm going to prove that all this stuff that the press is saying about me is a lie. It's a lie. So we contacted him, and I said, hey, we'll come film the polygraph, and we'll put it out there if you let us come film your art collection. And he goes, I'm shocked. I was amazed. He goes, great idea. And so there you go. So now we had our way in to go look at his art collection. And so for 2 days, I actually used to, as I was saying before, used to work with Japanese TV. So I had a colleague of mine, be the crew, because I couldn't really go in, because if I go in, if he finds out who I am, you could kind of reverse engineer that I was connected to Tony Tetro, that I'd written some stuff about him. And so
if he knew that you knew Tony, that wouldn't be good.
He would, this smells bad. But anyway, so we went for 2 days. We filmed in his house and office, and we didn't see any of the works. So we thought, aha, I think they actually went to Dumfries' house. And it was wild because my crew was in there, and he's showing him around for 2 days. He's pointing out like another Tony Tetro fake. And he's going, yeah, I bought this at Sotheby's. I think I paid $1 million for it. Isn't it great? And all this stuff. And he
knew that the Tony Tetro made them?
Oh, yeah.
And he was just lying to these people.
Yeah. I mean, he bought them. I have millions of emails. I have all the emails with, they're discussing the specific work of art. And, their emails with images of the work. And he's going, oh yeah, do it like this, maybe like that, put this stamp on it and all this other stuff. And he's sitting there talking about how, oh, yeah, I bought this at Sotheby's, it's a real thing. Oh, I'm so great.
Wow.
I know a lot about art and all this kind of stuff.
Oh my God.
Yes. So, we get back and I'm like, I think we got something, and I'm pretty excited. And I had a contact through someone. I had a contact who's a senior figure in MI6, which is foreign intelligence in the UK, like James Bond kind of thing. And he was an old guy. And I said to him, hey, I think this is going on. Do you know people in the palace who could verify this or who I could talk to? And he came back with this amazing email. And the person wrote back to him, somebody like the right-hand people in the palace wrote back and they said, Fawcett, Stunt's right-hand guy, who I think was involved, Fawcett, the palace, the firm, meaning the palace, the firm know about this. Fawcett will have gotten a rocket, meaning Fawcett would have just been blasted for this. And Giampiero will find all doors closed, meaning never complain and never explain. So we're going to pretend none of this happened. We're just going to pretend none of this happened. It's going to go away. You can't prove it. Those paintings are going to be gone. It's over. So we thought that, we're not going to just let it go like this. So we had made contact with some of the press in the UK. And we said, look, we have this story, can prove it all. I have millions of documents. I have all this stuff. I've done all this work. I can show you that this has happened. You publish it. And they go, because I wanted to force the hand of the palace. I wanted them to have to acknowledge it.
Right.
And so on the Mail on Sunday, we kind of worked the story up with them and they proved it up. And they went to Prince Charles's people and they had to acknowledge it. And they came back and they said, we acknowledge it happened. It's extremely regrettable. And, we were in London at the time and the editor called me up and he said, hey, tomorrow morning, check the paper, pages 1 to 5, check in there. Okay. So I'm like, all right, there's going to be an article somewhere between page 1 and page 5. I look, it's literally the entire first 5 pages of the newspaper, of the largest circulation Sunday newspaper in the UK, is this story. And I mean, it's huge headlines, fake art hits Prince Charles and all this stuff. So at that point, we knew we had it. And when you do something like that, suddenly, I mean, I'm sure know this from when you do something about a story, people come out of the woodwork. And now there's all kinds of stuff that you can find out. And, the first thing that happened is I was able to find more of his collection. And what I originally thought was that, all right, he got 4 Tony fakes in there. I still didn't know exactly what he was doing. I'm like, okay, he got 4 Tony. Is he like, are they going to lose them or burn them and then claim insurance? Now you've just made, I don't know, 15, 20 million from some fake works of art that got stolen or burned or whatever.
Interesting.
That's what I thought. But then I got all these other documents. And one of the things that I got was the assessment of his entire collection. And I'm like, all right, this guy's got Renoirs, Monets, Picassos. In the loan, there were 17 paintings. 4 of them were Tony Tetro paintings. So these other paintings, like Van Dyck and stuff like that, like very important paintings. I thought, okay, well, those are real. He fluffed it up with some Tony fakes, doubled the value. Okay, he kind of, plumped it up a little. Mm-hmm. But the reality was, when I looked at his whole collection, they were like kind of middling paintings, 10 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand. I think there was one that was maybe like 350 grand. That's a lot of money, but compared to the rest of this work, it's peanuts.
And what were the 4 of Tony's? What were they supposedly?
There was a Chagall, a
Picasso,
a Dali, and a Monet, right? So that was worth 150 million, just that.
God.
Right? Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's a ton of money. But I'm still thinking, well, what is he doing? And this doesn't make sense that he has these, he's really got kind of cheap paintings. And a lot of the paintings were what's called like followers, studio circle followers. So you and I today could go buy a follower of Rembrandt. Rembrandt's probably the most expensive painter in the world. Rembrandt Caravaggio. $100 million, right? $100 million.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought Picasso was the most expensive.
Probably most expensive modern painter, but
okay.
Old masters like those guys. I mean, extremely, extremely expensive. So you could go buy a studio or circle or follower, not studio for Rembrandt, but circle or follower. And what does that mean? That just means somebody who was around at the time, they liked Rembrandt, maybe they saw his paintings, they knew that he was great. They'd paint some of his painting, something
Same
like
time?
Same time.
Like maybe a student or something?
Or later. Could be a student, could be just somebody who's kind of around the milieu.
Yeah.
I mean, you're interested in films. You could be a follower of Martin Scorsese,
Right. Okay.
You have nothing to do with him except for the fact that
I'm a fan.
You're a fan.
Okay. Got it.
So anyway, you and I could go buy one for 10 grand, right? Now, if it's real, let's say it's 10 million of Van Dyke. Van Dyke you can buy for 10 grand, 6, 7, 8 million if it's real. Well, what's the difference between circle and by the hand of the master? Mostly somebody's opinion, right?
Right.
So I'm going to get to it in a minute. But so what happens
Opinions
is
can be paid for.
You're a wise man. So what happens is Stunt had all these studio circle followers, and he would go online and he'd talk about like, yeah, I'm really great at finding sleepers. Well, what's a sleeper? A sleeper is a painting that's been attributed as studio circle or follower, but it's really by the hand of the master. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So at the same time, what I found was Stunt had put together a PowerPoint presentation. He got a financial advisory in London called W. Coleman to put this thing together. And it was a little PowerPoint presentation. It had the Tony paintings and it had 13 other paintings. And it said, The Stunt Collection at Dumfries House. And it was a presentation. Well, what's a presentation for? Well, what he was doing, so he's got these paintings in there. He's got these Van Dykes in there, okay? He's got Tony's painting. He's got these Van Dykes. And if they're real, they're worth another 150 million or whatever. But all of these paintings, I mean, we figured out that all of these paintings were actually studio circle and follower, that he had gotten one guy who was the former director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and I mean a big time director, and was the deputy director of the National Portrait Gallery in London, one of the most important galleries in the world. He was a deputy director.
Wow.
And this guy is buddies with Stunt, right? He's buddies with Stunt, and somehow he's written 14 letters for him saying, hey, remember that painting that you bought as a circle at Sotheby's or Christie's for 10 grand? Well, I've looked at it and it's really by the hand of so-and-so. It's really by the hand of Van Dyke. It's worth, 10 million, right? Now, you find one of those paintings in a generation, it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal to find what you thought was a $10,000 painting. It's worth 10 million. He's found 14 of them from one collector, verified by one expert. How is that possible? It's not possible. Right. And we found this letter, we took a picture of this letter of Stunt. It said, from Prince Charles, it said, oh, James, it was such a sad thing that you couldn't be there when Malcolm Rogers, this expert, showed up with your paintings at Dumfries House to show them to me and to lend them to me. It's so wonderful of you to do this kind of stuff. And you go, why is Malcolm Rogers, this eminent director, hanging out with this, crazy cokehead who smokes crack on his social media and does his crazy stuff? Why is he hanging out with him? Well, he's getting something out of this thing, So when I called him up, I said, hey, there's a painting that you had. It's in the catalog resume. There's a Van Dyke painting that you had. And it was a copy. In the catalog, it says it's a copy owned by Malcolm Rogers. Well, how did James Stunt end up with it? And he goes, oh, well, he traded me another painting for it. And I go, that's interesting. Well, what painting was it? And he goes, it's none of your business. And that's kind of one of the things, one of the reasons why people like art, people with a lot of money like art, is because it's not because they love art. A lot of them do love art, but it's not just because they love art, but it's kind of the last Wild West financial instrument. So you can buy a painting. So my theory is there's no record of this. There's no nothing. It's just I give you a painting, you give me a painting. Great. It's a gift to you, a gift to me. Everybody's happy, right? So the painting I give you could be worth $1, and the painting you give me could be worth $10 million. Now you've just given me $10 million, but there's no record of it anywhere. There's no financial catalog. There's no nothing.
Right.
This is a great way to just like transfer money.
Launder money.
That's why people so you see a lot of financial transactions. Why do rich people, why do they even care about art? Why would you, isn't it stupid to pay $50 million for Picasso? It can't be worth that much money. Well, it is as a financial instrument, right? Because now you can, for example, buy a piece of modern art and you go, well, how the fuck did somebody pay $10 million for that banana taped to a wall? Right? Did you see the banana taped to the wall?
I did.
Okay.
In
so,
Miami.
yeah, right. So you go, well, how is that possible? And you go, okay, well, now you buy that paint. You take that painting, all right? Let's say, I don't know, you buy it for $2 million. Somebody says, well, it's worth $10 million. Now you lend it to an institution. Now you have $8 million of, kind of like charitable donation on your books. Nobody really knows what it's worth. You can kind of make it up.
It was printed out of thin air.
It's an immaterial kind of thing. The market has no comparable to that. You say it's worth 10. Is it really? I don't know. But now you have $10 million worth of tax write-off, right? And that's one of the things that people do with art. So it's used in all of these transactions. So what did Stunt do? Stunt took this fake art and this inflated art, this art that was student, follower, whatever, bundled it all up into this $300 million thing, lent it to Prince Charles. Now what does he do? Now he goes out to special art lenders, right?
So it's a $350 million catalog of art.
Yes.
That he loans to Prince Charles. And when you say he loans that $350 million worth of art to Prince Charles, what is he getting in return? The tax write-off?
Here's the thing. So now, here's a tip for if you're an evil dude or if you're somebody doing funky stuff, pay the people who work for you because they know everything.
Right.
So I located this guy who was the driver and bodyguard. This is this huge former Lithuanian former professional basketball player who was their bodyguard. And he would hang out downstairs.
For Stunt?
Yeah. And Stunt and his guy would be upstairs doing whatever they were doing. And they'd send an email down to this guy and they'd say, hey, can you print this document out and then bring it upstairs? And they'd email him. So this guy, who was not paid by Stunt, had a treasure trove of everything. And what it turned out was that, I met the guy and we, got to know each other and he sort of opened up about this stuff and gave me these things. But what it turns out happening is that Stunt had this collection. It's now at it's Prince Charles's royal collection. So it's like absolutely above suspicion, right? I mean, there is no better provenance than it is in the royal collection.
Right.
And all of these experts have said it's good.
Right.
Because he also made a bunch of fake letters and all this other stuff. But now he goes out to specialized art lenders in New York because there are people who will lend on your art. You go, I'm going to give you my Picasso as collateral. You lend me half the value. If I don't pay you back, you keep the art.
Like a pawn shop.
Yeah, pretty much. High class pawn shop with blue chip art.
Right.
Nothing more blue chip than it's in the prince's collection. Prince Charles has it right now. Lend me the money, of course. So he wanted $161 million. And the plan all along was, I just walk away from it. They keep the collateral. It's not worth anything.
Right. It's probably fake, right?
Yeah. It's all, I did the total sum of what that art was really worth. It was probably worth charitably $2 million. So you're getting $161 million off of $2 million collateral. It's a pretty good deal. You walk away. That's it.
Wow.
Yes.
This guy's a billionaire. And he's trying to.
Well, his wife was a billionairess.
Uh-huh.
He was wealthy, but not in that category. But he spent money like it was going out of style.
Was his wife still alive or no?
Yeah. Yeah. They got divorced. So when they got divorced, suddenly he's like, the gravy train is over. So I got to find access to
Didn't get a
some
great
money.
settlement on the divorce, huh?
No. And went through it quick. I mean, some of the sources were telling me, he'd go out and there'd be drugs and champagne and stuff, $100,000 a night, easy. That's
Jesus Christ.
That's pretty. You go through money pretty quick at that clip.
Whatever happened to Tony? Did he get charged with anything and go to prison?
Yeah. You mean, well, he got busted in 1989.
Oh, wow.
In 1989, he got busted. And he, because somebody wore a wire on him. One of the guys. So the interesting thing about Tony is that Tony never really fooled anybody with his paintings. Never fooled anybody. The dealers in Beverly Hills galleries and everywhere else would come to him and say, "Hey, Tony, I need a Picasso. I need some Dali. I need some Miro." And they knew they could get them from him. So they'd come to him, and then they were the ones selling the paintings, right? So one of those guys got busted and wore a wire.
Ratted on him.
Yeah, ratted on him. And Tony, who's this Italian-American guy from kind of a mob town in upstate New York, said, it is ingrained in the DNA of every Italian kid from Fulton, New York, that you never rat. The only time you rat is never. That's what he said. So this guy wore a wire. He ended up pleading and actually got off pretty easily. He did a year.
That's kind of an amazing picture.
Yeah.
So Tony only did a year?
He only did a year because he had been through like 5 years of trial.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think the judge kind of had mercy on him. And, it was debatable who was really at fault on a lot of these things. So I think they went a little easy on him.
It's kind of cool. His story is kind of cool. And I can imagine his paintings, a Tony Tetro Picasso, could be worth a lot of money now, you know?
I mean, that's what he does now. So when he got out of jail, he went clean because he was like, this time I got off fairly easy.
He went legit.
Yeah. I don't want to be here again. So he would paint. That's why he ended up painting these paintings for Stunt. So, before that, he had another very wealthy client, tech billionaire in Texas who, had a bunch of mansions and stuff. And he, I think, painted 99 paintings for him.
Jesus.
So, there's a very good living to be made making plausible forgeries, emulations for people who wanted to have art in their house. Some people want to have maybe they have a piece, maybe it's in the Freeport, maybe they want to put it on their wall,
right?
But they don't want to pull the thing out of insurance. They don't want to insure it. They don't want to worry about it.
Right.
So they get a Tony Tetro.
And whatever happened to Stunt?
Stunt was on trial. I mean, this was a big problem for our documentary. Our documentary is still not released.
I know.
Because
of him?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Because the reason it's not released is because after we released the story to the press, COVID hit. So we couldn't film for a year. That's when I wrote the book, Con Artist, about Tony. And when we kind of came back online, Stunt was then on trial for money laundering, the biggest money laundering trial in British history. Really? Yeah. And it was him and 4 co-defendants. So while he was on trial, we could not release the film. There are very, very, very stringent laws in the UK about contempt of court. So while someone's on trial, we could not.
Even if it's in America?
Yeah. Well, technically, we probably could have shown it in America, possibly, but the studio chose not to.
Ah, okay. Oh, you're working with the studio.
Right. So this trial took forever. Finally, the trial came back. Guilty or innocent didn't matter to us, right? Because if the trial would be over, we could show the film.
Right.
Well, what happened? The jury came back, hung, and the Crown Prosecution Service said, we're going to retry him, and we're going to retry him in 2 years. So 2.5 years later, which was just, a few months ago, the trial finally ended.
And where's he at?
Stunt was acquitted. All of his all of his associates were found guilty. The banks who were involved were all fined, had huge, hefty fines, and he walked.
No.
Yes.
Fucking way.
Correct. And the alleged attempted fraud with the art was never prosecuted because the lenders never consummated the loan. And so they just said, forget it. We'll let it go. So Stunt's walking around free as a bird.
Probably not rolling as hard as it used to be.
Nope.
Is this him on the right?
Yeah.
He looks kind of young there.
That was a younger.
That was an older photo.
And the one on the left is as he looks now.
The one on the left looks like he's had a little bit too much plastic surgery.
Yeah, I think there were some problems with the septum.
The deviated septum? He had to get a new nose. Or find a better way to get the coke in his body. Jesus.
And I say that because he would go on his social media and say, the social media was unbelievable.
I can imagine.
It's unbelievable. He's, you'll see it in the film, but he gets on there and he goes like, do I love cocaine? Yeah, I love it. Do I shag prostitutes? Yeah. Do I sleep with royalty? Yes, I do. All this kind of stuff. And, he's like sitting there in one shot, he's sitting there and he's smoking a foil thing off of a bottle. And he's going like, I'm just sitting here kicking it, chilling, smoking some crack and listening to some NWA gangster rap, as you do.
As one does.
As one does.
As a billionaire does.
Yeah. So, that's kind of his persona. And
as a guy who didn't earn any of the money that he has.
No.
He got it all out of the divorce from his super rich wife.
Well, yeah, yes and no. His father, it's interesting because his father was a self-made man from Brixton, which is, a middle class, working class part of London, made it big, made his fortune, sent James to a fancy school, which it's funny. He's actually a pretty funny guy. He said the students there were like cream, rich and thick meaning dumb. But, so he that's the milieu that he ended up in. And then when he married, so he was wealthy. But when he married Petra, it was like a completely different stratosphere. So they had like a, $15 million wedding at this castle in Italy.
Yeah.
And, the Black Eyed Peas helicoptered in to play and
right.
stuff like that. And then they bought this house. They had all this stuff in London. He used to drive around London in a cavalcade of cars. So, he'd go to Sotheby's or whatever. He'd be in this carbon fiber Lamborghini. He'd have rolls on both sides and then all that surrounded by Land Rovers. And that's how he'd pull up at Sotheby's or would he go get a pack of cigarettes or whatever. So that's what he used to do. And now that those days are over, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a connection between just like an absurd amount of wealth and degeneracy with people where like, I don't think it's good for people to have that much, like there's a sweet spot, right? And when you get a little bit too far, depending on your psychology, I'm sure a lot of people can handle it, right? But a majority of people cannot handle that kind of wealth.
I think it'd be hard. You've done your own stuff. I mean, you've achieved things. I've achieved stuff. You know, you got to, you know, there's some value to be said for, you got to wake up, you got to work hard, you got to be there. This may or may not work. You got to be able to take the risk. You know, you got to work really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that builds character.
Some of the best people I know, most interesting, fun people I know spent most of their lives poor.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. You got to come up, you know.
But I can, you know, the interesting thing is I can say the most fucked up degenerates I've met are also poor, you know, like, but also rich, you know, like I know some very degenerate rich people. So the spectrum is broad. You can't just paint a broad brush over that. But
yeah, I mean, this guy is a really, he's a really interesting character because I think, like, you know, I think that he genuinely wanted to, he mentions kind of like being cast in this new world, you know, and he was around Petra's friends who were all wealthy, very wealthy people, and people who knew like a lot about art and knew about all these things. And I think he was kind of thrust into that and felt like, oh, well, I want to prove myself, or I want to show that I know about something. And I think his initial, and one of his earliest friends and dealers, art dealers, said that, you know, he, in the beginning, it seemed like he had a genuine kind of like passion for art, you know?
Yeah.
But then sort of saw the various uses or the various ways that you could, you know, you could do things with art that were less than, you know, on the up and up.
The Lost Leonardo, the eventually, so that piece, the Salvator Mundi, which was allegedly, they thought that was basically drawn by one of Leonardo's students or something like this. And that lady went to go restore it. She stripped a bunch of stuff off it and then basically repainted like 90% of it. And long story short, it ended up in the yacht of Mohammed bin Salman, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, for like $500 million.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about that. And, you know, everybody has their opinion. And I will say, I am not an expert at all. And I'm just kind of, you know, observing and giving what I sort of think is plausible. But a lot of people think that it is actually real. Tony Tetro, the art forger, thinks it's real.
Does he really?
Yeah. Martin Kemp, who is the foremost Leonardo expert, I think thinks it's real, or think there's a very good chance that it's real.
Martin Kemp.
Yeah. But, you know, I'm not sure. And what I do find interesting, like what you say is correct. So if you take a painting and you restore it to the extent where you've repainted a whole bunch of it, well, yeah, of course it looks like Leonardo because you just painted it to look like Leonardo.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know. I'm not saying that's what happened. Her name is Diane Modestini. And, you know, she's very well regarded. And I don't know anything about this from an expert perspective, but I'll just say, you know, you do have to ask the question, like if it's been so extensively repainted, I mean, what can you really say about the painting? Right. You know, somebody like Kemp or Tetro will say that, you know, there are hallmarks of the work that definitely make it that. But the other thing here is, you know, so it was $450 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And what the film gets into, which I thought was really interesting, was great piece of work, was there's a lot of pressure with that kind of money that can be brought to bear when really all you're talking about is opinions, right? I mean, would $450 million get you to say that Steve's the greatest guy who ever lived? It might make me say that, you know?
Tenet, that was the movie. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, this was such a good scene. Play with no audio so we don't get copyrighted and make it small. Sorry, what were you saying?
So the Leonardo, I mean, when there's that much money at stake, there's a lot of pressure that can be brought to bear, right? So what I thought was really interesting about that film was that all of these efforts, once MBS had bought the painting, there was a lot of pressure put by the Saudi government on the French government to make that thing be real. So if you remember, there was this whole thing about like, they're talking about as the male Mona Lisa. The most famous painting in the world is the Mona Lisa.
Yes.
Well, this thing, we're now going to make it be the male Mona Lisa.
Right.
So they were trying to get the Louvre to show the piece next to the Mona Lisa, right? And legitimize it. And
who was trying to do this? Mohammed bin
MBS.
Salman?
Yeah,
Okay.
because now he owns it. So he's like, all right, well, now I'm going to make this really valuable.
Just having that documented being there would be extremely valuable.
Yes. Because that's what happens with a lot of pieces. Like sometimes if someone has a questionable painting, they might lend it to a museum, under really favorable terms. Why? Because they wanted to have that stamp. This was in the, this was in MoMA.
Right.
So now you've just added value. But anyway, so he's trying to add this value. And what they did was they came to the Louvre and the Louvre said, no. I think they had a book printed up and then they pulled it. And they were going to put it in there and then they pulled it because they had doubts. So MBS says to the French government, hey, listen, we would consider it a great favor if you maybe suggested to the Louvre that this thing be shown next to the Mona Lisa, right? And then they said, and by the way, we are building this huge city in the desert, and why wouldn't a French company get that contract? Right.
Right.
Let's see if we can't do something here. That's kind of what the film talks about. And
that's the way the whole world works, man.
Yeah. And that's what, you think that art is kind of like some blue blood, kind of specialty pursuit for people with really high sensibilities. And it is. And they're very genuine and passionate people in art, but there's a whole other part of it. The market is a different animal altogether. I mean, that's really a lot of people who don't know much or care much about art for art's sake, use it as a useful financial instrument.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Would this modern art be what it is culturally if it wasn't for the billionaires, the stunt type fellas, or the MBSs, or the Pope, or the popes for that matter, like with the Sistine Chapel,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Look, art has always has to have patrons. I mean, the great art of the past had patrons.
Yes.
You had Cardinal, the Vatican, just every church in Italy has 12 master paintings. Somebody paid for those. There were great patrons at the turn of the century. Industrialist tycoons and stuff were building museums. Carnegie and all that kind of stuff. They're building museums. So there's always patrons, but I think it's kind of reached a different level now. And a lot of that is because there really aren't that many ways to transact that are not very traceable or that are really subjective, right? I mean, it's kind of hard. You can't carry around $50 million in gold. You can't. It's a huge amount.
Right.
You can roll up a little painting, carry it around across borders, you're fleeing a country or whatever. Hey, you got this thing. So there's that kind of utility. But also, with like know your client regulations and money laundering regulations and stuff like that, it's just a lot harder to do funky transactions. With art, it's so subjective that it's really easy to do. You can make 50 million become 80 million. You can make 20 million become 50 million with the stroke of a pen.
Right.
And it's all subjective. I mean, people talk about comparables and stuff, but I mean, like I said, who's really gonna, if somebody pays for it, then that's what it's worth.
Yes. Right.
So you don't know.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why it's used so much now.
We were going to talk about Pollock and the CIA.
Sure. So you know a little bit about this topic, it sounds like, but some of it is, I think, overblown, and some of it that some people make a little too much out of it. That's my personal opinion. But so I started looking at this because of my book Con Artist and because of the James Stunt investigation. I have been contacted by some collectors who will say, look, I'm thinking about buying this piece, or, I've been introduced to this piece. What do you think? Use your investigative chops or whatever and see what you can find out about this thing. Does it seem real or does it seem, potentially fake? So a person brought to me a Pollock, purported Pollock, not in the catalog. There are a lot of fake Pollocks out there. There are a lot of really bad fakes. There are some pretty good ones. But so he brought me this Pollock that had been in Switzerland. And it came out of Switzerland. It had a provenance behind it that it showed up in Switzerland in the early 50s, mid 50s. It had been in some prominent families in Switzerland. And it had some marks on it from the U.S. consulate and a couple of people. So I started looking at this and, what could this thing be? And, it turns out that in the post-war period, there was a Cold War on, and it was really for the hearts and minds of people.
Propaganda war.
Yeah, exactly. It was a propaganda war, and some of the main propaganda war was being fought for the hearts and minds of intellectuals. So, the Soviet Union was saying, like, look what Western democracies wrought. So what we need is a world where the artist is working for the greater society and is doing basically like a political act, which is for the people. And so what Americans wanted to show was like, no, really our method is the best, whereby we let people be very free.
Yes.
And you just can do whatever you want. You can be a leftist. You can be on the right, you can do whatever, but our society says we get better, richer, smarter, happier when we give people freedom. And so the CIA wanted to counter kind of like, Soviet realism with an art form that would appeal to these people. And they looked at abstract expressionism, like, what Jackson Pollock was doing. And they're like, well, here's this artist. He's a leftist. He's kind of a cowboy kind of guy. He's from Wyoming. He's a big drinker, masculine guy. And he does these paintings that are so free, they don't even have to mean anything. They don't represent anything. They're not impressionist. Here's an impressionistic view of a landscape. They're just like pure expression.
Can you find a photo of Jackson Pollock, Steve? I've never actually looked at a photo of him.
Yeah. He's from Wyoming originally and was, kind of like a cowboy kind of guy before he came to New York.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he was like he drank too much, but I mean, he died because of it.
As most of the best artists do.
Yeah. But he was like a heavy drinking, masculine, tough guy sort of vibe. And so they thought, okay, well, we need to push these paintings. And their initial steps at kind of pushing modernism were really terrible and ham-fisted. And there were all these senators who came out and said like, hey, your taxpayers bought this crap. Your taxpayers bought these crappy paintings and brought them around and stuff. So the CIA said, hey, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do this kind of on the down low. And what they did was they set up all of these foundations and stuff that were really CIA fronts to support gallery shows and symposiums and magazines and newspapers and stuff. Like famously, the Paris Review was a CIA front and founded by these things. And what I found, so anyway, I started doing a lot of research about this particular Pollock painting, and I went and looked in the archives of MoMA and Crystal Bridges and at the Pollock Foundation out in Long Island and stuff. And, I kind of started looking at all of the communications between all of these people. And I mean, there isn't anything that crazy nefarious in my mind here. But they just kind of started pushing this as much as they could, but without really kind of telling anybody that it was the government that was behind this stuff. And what was really interesting to me was
because these people were fundamentally against the government and the wars and everything that was going on.
Yes. So you could kind of show like somebody like Jackson Pollock, he's a leftist. He's a guy who
anti-CIA probably.
Yes. And so you could use him. And I don't think he was in on this. And I don't think there was any big, hey guys, okay, Jackson, we're calling you in for a meeting and this is what we're going to, it wasn't like that at all.
He'd be a useful idiot.
Yes.
As I am, as we all are.
But what was kind of interesting was if you look at all of the people who founded the Museum of Modern Art and the foundations that were related to them, almost all of them were wartime intelligence operatives. So, they were intellectuals. They were not out there, trudging with guns through trenches. They were fighting a cultural war during the war and afterwards. And they just kind of kept doing that as they went forward. So the Museum of Modern Art formed what was called the International Program. And that International Program sort of took money and funneled it into these different organizations that then put on shows by Pollock. So what I ended up finding with my painting that I was looking at was, there's a pretty plausible case for this being one of those paintings that ended up going over to Europe and then ended up through Switzerland through the consul. So they were using governmental agencies like the consuls and stuff to put these shows on, to receive the paintings. And, there are like letters where somebody's like, hey, I want to know the price of these paintings that were in this show. And they're like, well, why don't you just ask the consulate? So it was very much kind of like this governmental, like, why does the consulate have the prices of these Jackson Pollock paintings that appeared in this show in Paris? And it's because they were kind of, using this soft power stuff. So I don't think it's a big cloak and dagger, spy kind of situation, but I think it's just another one of these kind of soft power governmental things. But what I found, the thing's kind of interesting is there is a very plausible case for this painting. And I, as a person who likes evidence, goes, that's great. I can make up a story about anything. But now let's go take a look at this, at the actual, what paint is there? Is this wood from the period? Is this paint real? Because the one thing that's cool about Jackson Pollock is that somebody had the bright idea, because he painted on the floor. He had just unstretched canvas, just cloth on the floor, and he would drip paint on the floor and use sticks and things to kind of spatter paint and whatever. The studio has all kinds of paint on the floor.
Right.
So a few years ago, somebody went, took samples of all that paint and did what's called
on the floor.
Yeah.
Oh, his studio is still intact.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So they went and they took all those paint samples and they did what's called Raman spectroscopy. It's an imaging thing that gives you basically signatures of elements. So you can go,
the chemical makeup or whatever.
Correct. So you can go, okay, well, this paint in this painting that I'm looking at has the exact same paint as the paint that's on the studio floor. And they also did that analysis on a couple of known Pollock paintings. So one of them is called Alchemy 1A. Yeah,
Whoa.
There you go.
That's wild,
yes.
Dude.
So you can do that. So I have been working with a well-known university laboratory that does kind of Nobel level research, not related at all to art, because I wanted to go to a place that did not deal with art, because for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
One of them being that it's my impression that you can, in some places, buy the result you want. So I didn't want to have any bias or any, kind of previous knowledge or any, these people don't care about this. It's an art thing. It's interesting to them, but it's not what they do. So they can look at it in a dispassionate way. And much to my surprise, at every step, it kind of keeps going forward. Yes, it matches the paint. Does the blue match? Yeah, the blue matches. Does the red match? Yeah, the red matches. It matches the floor and it matches alchemy 1A or whatever. And so you keep going forward, and then, you do this radiocarbon dating.
Yeah.
So, and the thing that's interesting about radiocarbon dating is that because there was a lot of nuclear testing starting in the late 50s and into the 60s, there's a very specific signature from that blast of stuff that was, it's not present in stuff that started, that came earlier.
Interesting.
So if you do radiocarbon and you're looking for isotope 14, carbon 14, if you're looking for carbon 14 and it's not there, then it probably predates. And then they stopped atmosphere.
Anything?
Yeah.
Like anything?
Most stuff, I think.
Wow.
Again, no expert, but you can do it on paint. You can do it on linen. You can do it on the wood of the stretcher bars and stuff. But what's also interesting is that you can, because they then stopped testing, it kind of died off, right? So depending on where that level of carbon 14 is, you can sort of say, well, I think that's probably 1962 to 1964. In our case, the painting is, supposedly from 48, 49. So if you find evidence of lots of nuclear testing, it couldn't have been, right? Because that would have been after. So it's really interesting that you can do all of these things, whereas before you would just kind of say, as an expert, yes or no. Now you can actually do all of these things, which are, kind of irrefutable science. So I went and I did all the stuff that I know about. And, yes, this kind of makes sense. Here's all this evidence. Here's notes saying that these paintings were sent from France to Switzerland. They were sent to the consulate and all this kind of stuff. That gets you somewhere there, right? But then when you really look at the paint, all that other stuff, that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. But, and here's art, here's where art is interesting. A lot of people will tell you, like, that's all well and good. That's fine. However, if the experts with connoisseurship, their eye, don't like it, good luck. Good luck.
Really?
Despite having all the evidence.
No matter how much scientific data you have.
Good luck.
You have to have the people connected to the institutions.
Yeah.
And the nod.
Yeah. And also because I think part of that is, I think it's good to have like all of it. But I think there's also some reluctance on the part of some institutions to say, like, yes, okay, you did not use us in any part of this, or you did not sort of get our okay. So therefore we are withholding it.
Why was the Renaissance the period of time when we had the most like insane amount of art coming out? Not just art, like architecture, all these cathedrals that were built. Like it just seems like an absorbent amount of creativity was coming out during that time. And like, people were creating stuff. I'm guessing that people were doing this stuff not just as like a thing for a return on investment. They weren't doing this because it was going to make them money. They were creating this stuff because something else was going on in society that was promoting like just a crazy amount of creativity. Like whether was it the climate? I mean, I'm sure the climate, the economy, like the religious culture that was going on. I'm sure there were so many elements that were contributing to that. But it's just interesting how that period in history is just known for so much amazing art. Yeah, I mean, the very short answer is the church and the Counter-Reformation. So you had the church, vastly wealthy, who wanted to, the Reformation said, hey, you can have a personal one-on-one relationship with God through your own reading of the Bible. And the Catholic Church said, well, yeah, that's all good, but there also needs to be a hierarchy, and we are the institution on earth, which is, kind of mediating between the two. So they wanted to, bring these stories to the common person
through the church, through painting. They wanted to illustrate it. Here's the story of St. Matthew. And there were, and, you could make the argument that essentially these were comic books, graphic novels of their time for people to look at. And there was a tremendous amount of money available to do this. And, in the book, Con Artist that I wrote with Tony, he talks a lot about how Caravaggio's his favorite artist, but like when Caravaggio came to Rome, it was like Hollywood was in the 50s or whatever. It's like every artist, every person, everybody who wanted to be a director went to LA, went to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Everybody who wanted to be an architect or an artist or a sculptor or whatever went to Rome, because that's where all the commissions were coming from the church. They were building these massive cathedrals, building churches, decorating them, chapels, everything.
Right. Yeah. And I think Leonardo da Vinci, he was also, like, if I remember correctly, he was doing all kinds of things, like developing things for war, like weapons and stuff for war and stuff like this, and like being commissioned to do stuff. Like, I mean, I guess a lot of it was just, he was just trying to feed himself.
Yeah. I mean, they like some Da Vinci, I'm not as familiar with his life because, I want to stress that I'm not a great art expert.
Right.
But I do know, a little bit. But yes, I mean, he was, some people would argue that he was an engineer first,
right,
and an artist after, so he famously came up with designs for like helicopter screws and, flying machines and different catapults and instruments of war, like you say. And so, when I talk to Tony always says, that he was just as a boy, just fascinated with the notebooks of Da Vinci and was actually more interested in Da Vinci, the engineer, than Da Vinci, the artist, because he wasn't actually a very prolific artist. He worked really, really, really slowly. So it'd take him years to make paintings, months and months and months to make paintings, whereas Caravaggio would make like literally a painting in a day. Because when he first came to Rome, he was, like imagine a 22-year-old person going to Hollywood because they want to be a director.
Yeah.
The same kind of thing. And so he got, he got a job painting essentially like tourist postcards, and he'd have to paint like these heads one in a day, or fruit. His job was to paint fruit, still lives. And so he'd do one in a day. And that's how he would, he'd make a penny or whatever.
Wow.
And he lived with this guy, Monsignor Del Monte. And he called him Monsignor Salad because he said that all he ever fed him was salad.
Really?
Yeah, he was just like, he was the literal starving artist. Wow. But that's what, that was the climate of the Renaissance. And that kind of points out, that for everything that we say about, the evils of the art market and, all this stuff, you must have patrons. You must have people who are interested in having art and want to pay for it or feel it's important enough in their lives that it's a priority for them to spend money on. Otherwise, no art.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have the person who's commissioning stuff.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it is really interesting how it's evolved, especially like what we were talking about with the Cold War and art and the CIA trying to, through like second and third hand people, fund these artists and prop up this industry of art, of modern art, and to just basically like show that, hey, we're all about liberty and creativity and openness, and like we're so much better than the Soviet Union. And like, yeah, there was no like victims or anything. They weren't like kidnapping and torturing people. They were just spending taxpayer dollars on trying to drive culture and show how much better we were. And that was during the whole like McCarthy area too, right? So like,
I mean, that's why they had to use the CIA, because they had the first couple of shows. I forget what it was called. I think it was called Advancing American Art or something like that. And they bought all of these paintings from famous artists of the time.
Right.
And they put them out there, and then everybody came out and said, like, this is like modern art is all communistic. This is all garbage. And Harry Truman famously said, if that's art, then I'm a Hottentot.
Right.
Right. So, but you think about this, like everything that happens, basically starts with an idea. I mean, you go like, well, books don't matter, and all this kind of stuff. Well, they do, because everything starts with ideas, and that exchange of ideas is what makes like real world changes happen or things happen. So art of its time, and, depending on how you define art, I mean, what's the art of today? I mean, I don't know what you think, but, is it a painting? Probably not. Is it a TikTok video? Maybe. Is it, music? Probably. Is it a little video? Yeah, probably. Is it a meme? Yes. That's really the art of today. And think about how many ideas and how much our world has changed because of ideas that we're exchanging. So art doesn't look like it used to in the past.